Roland was an ordinary man, living his ordinary, insignificant life. But one day, he was reincarnated into the body of a medieval prince. And it's not one of the good kinds of princes because he is the prince of a Blackwater town in the middle of nowhere, and he is currently the target of an assassination plot. So he needs to find a way to survive before he meets his doom. One day, a witch in the village saved a man from getting his head chopped off by burning the attacker to death. And instead of thanking her for saving his life, the first thing that dude did was snitch on her to the local guards, and after she was caught, she was tied up in the city square to be burned at the stake while all the local lords watch for their amusement. All that's left is for the ruler to show up and render his verdict to sentence her to death, but he is known for being a lazy bum, so the lords are starting to wonder if he's ever going to get here. One of the prince's advisors, Barov, goes to find him, and as he is walking through the halls, he spots one of these maids, Tyre, and asks her if she knows where the prince is. But she tells him that the prince is currently still asleep in his room. Barov more or less expected that, so he believes Tyre and prepares to go in and wake him up. But Tyre looks really nervous, and she starts walking away as fast as she can. To Barov's shock, when he enters his room, he finds him unconscious and unresponsive in his chair. He approaches the prince cautiously while trying to wake him up, and to his relief, the prince eventually does regain consciousness, but he's not the same anymore. Roland wakes up in the prince's body, and he has no idea who he is or what he's doing here, but he is slowly recalling memories from the prince's brain to piece together what the situation is. Barov assumes the prince must just be groggy from sleep, so he reminds him that he still needs to make an appearance to sentence a witch to death. And though Roland is still unsure about what's going on, he decides to just play along for now and act the part. But judging by the memories the prince has from just before Roland took over, it's pretty safe for him to assume that he was poisoned in an assassination attempt, so he needs to be careful. Barov brings him out onto the stage where all the villagers are eagerly awaiting his verdict, but when he finds out that this is meant to be a witch trial, he is understandably confused because he had no idea witches even existed here. He can't bring himself to sentence someone to death when he doesn't understand the full situation, so he makes up an excuse and tells Barov that he is tired and that he will deliver a verdict at a later date. Barov is concerned and tries to convince Roland to just finish the conviction now, since everyone knows that if you don't execute a witch immediately after finding them, then there's a chance they'll attract other witches. However, Roland brushes him off and says it's not a big deal since they can always just catch any new witches that show up. Later on, Roland is going through town in his personal carriage to get a proper understanding of what this world is like, and from the looks of it, this is clearly a medieval country, and the people of this village don't seem like they are particularly fond of the prince. After Roland's little excursion, he returns to the castle to think about everything he has learnt, and it's not looking good for him. The public views Roland as an unreliable prince, and he is in charge of this insignificant territory in an ignorant and dangerous era. And to make matters worse, he is currently involved in a power struggle for the throne, so his life may very well come under attack at any point. That said, there's not much he can do aside from accepting things as they are, so he decides to live as this prince and make the best of the situation. The next morning, Roland calls for Barov to meet him in his room, and when Barov arrives, Roland asks him to take a seat so they can talk. Barov does as instructed, and there are actually a few things he wanted to talk to Roland about as well. So he asks him why he chose to postpone the execution back then because it's not something that should be delayed on a whim. Roland asks why it is so urgent, and Barov explains that there have been some recent sightings of witches out in the forest, and one of the guards managed to find this out there. It is a symbol of the Witch Cooperation Association. Roland has no idea what the witch organization is supposed to be, so he asks Barov to explain it, and he is informed that it is essentially a group of witches who have agreed to work together. Before the association was formed, witches always acted alone, but the association seeks to unite all witches towards the end goal of finding a place called the Holy Mountain. Roland asks what the Holy Mountain is, so Barov tells him that according to the rumors, it is a place where one can find eternal peace and happiness, and the witches are so dedicated to finding it that they have supposedly begun luring people into becoming witches. In fact, there are rumors that a group of girls who went missing near the port were actually kidnapped by the witches. So basically, Barov is worried that the Witch Association will find out that they haven't executed the witch yet, and come here to try and rescue her. He also mentions that witches have terrifying powers at their disposal, so it would be difficult for even the best of knights to stop them if they decided to attack. Speaking of powers, Roland asks what kind of power the witch being held actually has, and Barov tells him that she reportedly produced hellfire and used it to burn a man in the mines a few days ago, and the flames were so hot that the victim's skin melted clean off his body. Roland had originally thought the whole witch thing was just superstition, but if the witches really do have powers, then that makes things a whole lot more interesting. So Roland tells Barov to take him to where the witch is being held because he would like to talk to her before deciding on her execution. Roland then starts walking for the door, and Barov tries to convince him not to do it since he thinks it is far too risky, but Roland has already made up his mind, so nothing is going to stop him. Roland is eventually brought down to the dungeon along with Barov and his head knight, Carter, and Carter is trying to talk him out of this because he also thinks it is too risky. But Roland shuts him up by asking how he can be trusted to rule this territory if he is too scared to even look at the threats that it faces. A few moments later, they are brought to the cell of the witch in question, and once Roland finally gets a look at her face, he realizes that she looks like a perfectly normal girl. Seeing that someone is here to meet her, the witch gets on her feet, and after Roland introduces himself as the ruler of this town, he asks her what her name is. The witch responds and tells him that her name is Anna, and Roland then asks Anna to tell him of everything that happened in that mine from her perspective because he wants to understand the full picture. Anna is surprised that the prince actually cares about her side of the story since she was sure he would just sentence her to death without a word like any other witch. She explains to him that her father was one of the miners who was working in the mine when it collapsed. She desperately wanted to make sure that he was okay, so she ran into the mines looking for him, and when she eventually did find him, she saw that he was buried under some rubble, and one of his co-workers was trying to take advantage of the situation to steal her father's money, and the man was about to kill her father to make sure he wouldn't be accused of stealing later. And seeing her father about to be killed, Anna had no choice but to kill the attacker first. That series of events sounds perfectly plausible, so Roland believes her. But if she killed the attacker and everyone else had already fled the mine, then Roland wonders how she was caught in the first place. Anna trembles a little when she recalls what happened, but she tells Roland that she was reported to the guards by her own father. Roland is shocked when he hears that Anna's own father snitched on her, and asks Barov if that's true, which he confirms. He was personally surprised by it as well, but the man likely did it because the reward for reporting witches is 25 gold pieces, which is a lot of money. Roland then goes on to ask Anna how exactly she killed the attacker since he must have been a lot stronger than her, to which Anna tells him that she used her magic, more commonly called the power of the devil by the townspeople. The very mention of her powers makes Carter and Barov recoil in fear, but Roland casually asks her if she can show him a demonstration because he is curious. Both Carter and Barov tell Roland to stop talking nonsense because the only thing stopping Anna from using magic right now is the God's Stone of Retaliation, which suppresses the power of witches, and if Roland takes it off to see her magic, then the results could be catastrophic. Even Anna tells him that it's a reckless idea because curiosity like that could lead to his death, but Roland isn't particularly worried because he knows that even if Anna was the kind of person to go for revenge, her target would be her father, not him. He then walks up to Anna and grabs the stone, but before he can take it off, Carter grabs Roland, telling him that he's about to make a terrible mistake, inadvertently causing the stone necklace to be ripped right off Anna's neck. And once the power of the stone is no longer restricting her magic, Anna is able to use her fire powers once more, engulfing the entire room in flames. Carter and the others drag Roland out of the cell to ensure his safety, and they urge him to leave the dungeon at once before Anna kills him. But Roland tells them they are overreacting because despite the massive volume of flames coming from Anna, none of those flames have actually left the cell, so she must be consciously controlling them to make sure no one gets hurt. But make no mistake, those flames are still incredibly hot, so hot in fact that the chains holding Anna's arms melt right off and her clothes are burned to ash in an instant. She then steps out of the cell and puts out the raging flames before asking Roland if he was satisfied with her demonstration. If so, she asks him if he can just kill her already because she is tired of being caged up like an animal, but instead Roland smiles and covers Anna with his cape, telling her that he actually wants to ask her to work for him. Roland has a lot of scientific knowledge from his past life, so he knows just how inexplicable the power of the witches is because the laws of thermodynamics say it shouldn't be possible for Anna to produce fire from nothing. Yet she is fully capable of doing so. In any case, while the intricacies of how her power works still remain a mystery to him, as far as he is concerned, Anna is incredibly valuable. Thus, he has put great effort into making sure she isn't hunted down anymore. A little while later, Barov comes in to tell Roland that he has finished organizing the cover-up and fool the townspeople into thinking that a different prisoner who was set to be executed was actually Anna. Roland thanks him for his diligent work. Roland then asks Barov to gather some data for him regarding all the trade done by this border town, the taxes, and the expenditures as well. He also asked for info on the workshops in town as well, and Barov is genuinely surprised because he has never seen Roland take such an active interest in the affairs of the town before. He asks Roland if he is finally taking the royal decree seriously, but Roland doesn't really want to answer that question. The royal decree that Barov was talking about is related to the succession dispute Roland found out about earlier. His brother, Gerald, is in charge of the military stronghold in the north. Timothy is in charge of the economic hub in the east. His sister, Garcia, handles the trade port in the south, and Tilly manages the central district in the center of Silver City. All of his siblings were put in charge of prosperous and important regions, but as for Roland, he was basically banished to this small town in the far west. Roland asks Barov if he genuinely thinks he stands a chance at winning the succession battle with the current circumstances, and Barov would like to say yes, but he's not a LARPer. So he tells Roland flatly that he's got no chance. This town is broke AF with nothing going on, and on top of all that, the other nobles all think of Roland as nothing more than a bum, so it'll be practically impossible for him to gather any supporters as things are, and that's pretty much the response Roland was expecting to hear. He then asks Barov who he thinks holds all the power in the kingdom, and the usual answer would be Roland's family, the Wimbledons, but in reality, Roland tells him that all the power is held by the church. The only people who can be crowned as the new ruler of the kingdom are those who have earned the approval of the church, so no matter how many achievements Roland or his siblings rack up, it won't matter in the end. That's why Roland wants to dismantle the hold of the church on the kingdom, and the best way to do that is to start by dismantling the lies of the church. For instance, the lie about all witches being evil. Barov asks if that's why he chose to save Anna, but instead of answering, Roland reminds Barov that he has been working as an assistant financial advisor here for 20 years. But if Roland ends up winning the royal decree, then Barov may get a title bump to something like right-hand man of the king, and Barov understands what Roland is trying to suggest. Barov then left Roland's room, and as he is walking away, Carter tries to get his attention to see if Barov managed to talk some sense into Roland about giving up on his witch plans, but Barov doesn't seem interested in talking about that right now. Meanwhile, out in the courtyard, Anna is currently deep in thought, wondering what Roland plans to do with her because earlier today, Barov came to her, telling her that Roland had prepared an equal employment contract for her. It basically means that she will be required to complete various tasks from Roland, and in exchange, he will pay her 1 gold per month, which is more than most people's annual salary. She could hardly believe it, so she asked Barov if it was a mistake, but Barov assured her that the salary was chosen by Roland himself, so there is no mistake. It's not like Anna has many other options, so she can't exactly refuse, but now she can't help but wonder what Roland plans to make her do. Just then, Roland comes out to greet Anna and asks her if she slept all right last night. Anna tells him that she's fine, but she really wants to know why he saved her and why he's treating her so well even though she's a criminal who killed someone. Roland tells her that all she did was save the life of her father, who was about to be slain by a bandit, and that's nothing more than self-defense, so she can't be punished for that. Even so, Anna reminds him that she is a witch, and that is a crime she cannot be forgiven for, but Roland doesn't see it the way. He picks up a flower nearby and gives it to Anna before telling her that it is extremely poisonous, and Anna drops it out of fear as a result, but Roland tells her he was only joking. There's no way he'd ever let poisonous flowers grow in his garden, but despite the fact that the flower was harmless, Anna still dropped it because she had been convinced that it was dangerous. Roland thinks the powers of witches are neither good nor evil, so whether people fear or love them is entirely determined by their perception of them. Right now, the general perception of witches is really low, and most people genuinely believe that the world would be better off if all witches were dead, including Anna herself. But that's not necessarily true. Of course, if Anna really wants to die, he isn't going to stop her, but he tells her that dying won't solve any of her current problems, and it won't change her father's opinion of witches either, so she will never be able to return to her normal life. But if she chooses to help him, then together they can create a world where witches like her do not need to live in fear. She won't have to hide her powers or be ashamed of her identity, and she might even be able to use her powers to prevent people from suffering. Anna desperately wants to be able to go back to her normal life, so if Roland says he can make it so that witches are accepted by the general public, then she is willing to take part in whatever he has planned. Roland is glad to hear that, so he tells her that the first order of business is for her to learn how to control her powers properly so she can adjust the heat, size, and direction of her flames at all times. And he also warns her not to burn her clothes off like last time, or anything else for that matter. And while Anna focuses on her training, Roland begins studying for the next phase of his plan. At the same time, the maid who had attempted to assassinate Roland before is currently delivering a report to her superior via carrier pigeon, and there's no telling what she has in mind. The next morning, Roland calls Barov into his office and explains that he recently looked over all the trading documents of the town, and he discovered that mining is this town's only profitable activity, including a fair amount of building materials, metal ores, and precious gemstones. However, despite the large amount of money that the mines must be producing, last year's profits were listed as nearly zero. Also, based on these reports, the town has basically no agricultural production whatsoever, yet people don't seem to be starving. So something is definitely going on with the food supply. Barov is surprised that Roland really managed to go through all the documents in one night, and he explains that until now, almost all ores produced in this town have been traded to the Longsong stronghold in exchange for food. Roland finds it odd that the ores were traded instead of sold, but Barov explains that in the eyes of the Lord of Longsong, the border town is already his property, so all he does is give the workers enough rations to keep them from starving. Before Roland became this town's lord, the previous ruler of the town, Baron Boris, always obeyed the orders of Longsong and handed the ores over without complaint. Roland remembers seeing Boris a little while ago, and he got the distinct feeling that Boris is a weirdo, but it makes no sense for Boris to have agreed to hand over all the ores when he was the owner of this territory. However, this is where Barov points out that Boris and many other nobles here actually own property in Longsong, so their personal interests benefit from transferring the town's wealth over there. Roland now understands the situation, and he knows they can't carry on like this, so he tells Barov that, effective immediately, they will no longer be giving any ores to Longsong. Barov asks what they are going to do about their food supply if they cut ties with Longsong. So Roland tells him they will just take their ores to Willow Town instead and sell them there to earn enough money to buy proper food for Border Town. Barov doesn't think that will work since Willow has never bought such large amounts of ore before, so they might reject the deal, but Roland says they can simply sell all the ores at half price, and with such a good deal, there's no way Willow Town will refuse. While they will be losing out on half of their profits, the immediate sale is way better than the deal going on with Longsong, and in the future, they can expand their trade to other regions to improve their annual revenue. Barov agrees that a plan like that would definitely improve Border Town's finances, but he doesn't think it's a good idea to antagonize Longsong because if they stop giving them the ores, then they won't take in the villagers over the winter. Roland has no idea what Barov is talking about, so Barov explains that every winter, the beasts in the forest are corrupted by demonic power and run wild, attacking everything in their path. Border Town has no walls, so they aren't capable of defending themselves against the beasts, so they are forced to migrate to the Longsong stronghold every single year, and they are only able to return once the beasts have retreated in the spring. Roland calls for a meeting with a few hunters who have encountered the demonic beasts before, and he is informed that for the most part, the demonic beasts are just animals which have had their primal instincts enhanced, but that said, there are some genuine demons that appear from time to time, with the strength of a lion, the wings of an eagle, and incredible toughness. Monsters like that are nearly impossible to kill, but fortunately, there aren't many of them, and their wings only allow them to glide for short distances, so most walls are still effective at keeping them out. The regular animals are much easier to deal with in comparison, and one of the men, Iron Axe, has apparently killed two personally. Roland asks him to tell him about it, so the man explains that he encountered a boar type and a wolf type. The boar type has an incredibly tough hide, and the wolf type is incredibly fast, so it required a trap to capture. He also explains that when the first group of demonic beasts shows up, they usually light a beacon to warn the people of the incoming threat so they can evacuate, and Roland is grateful for all their hard work, so he gives them 10 silver coins as a reward and sends them on their way. Afterwards, Roland asks Carter to accompany him to the location of the beacon, and once there, Roland begins mapping out exactly how much time they would have once the first monster is sighted to figure out the response time. Carter sees this and asks if Roland really intends to have the people stay in Border Town over the winter, and Roland confirms it, saying he plans to build a great wall around Border Town for that exact reason. The first step in Roland's plan is to actually build the wall, and under normal circumstances, doing so in 3 months would be impossible with the current technology of this world, which is why Roland decides to invent something they've never seen before. He orders the workers to go gather limestone and some other materials from the mines and bring them to a separate room, after which he sends Anna in to use her fire on the limestone to turn it into clinker, and after that is done, Roland thanks Anna and then asks the guards to mix the clinker in a 10-to-1 ratio with gypsum, and what's left is some A-grade genuine cement. The others have no idea what's so impressive about the cement since it looks like a regular old pile of sand to them, but then Roland explains that with this, they can easily turn a pile of loose stones into the strongest wall this country has ever seen, and to prove it, he has his knight pour the cement on that pile of loose stones over there. By morning, the cement has completely set, So Roland asks Carter if he would like to test the sturdiness of the pile, and Carter obliges. He takes a shovel and gives it a good whack, but sure enough, the pile is incredibly solid now. Carter is amazed because with a substance like this, it really might be possible to build a wall around the city in only 3 months, and they might even be able to reinforce the castle, making it safer than ever before. But Roland says they won't only be using it on the castle. He plans to use the cement to make better homes for everyone. So in due time, all his people will be able to live in sturdy houses, and they won't need to worry about storms or blizzards destroying their homes anymore. But that will have to be a goal for the future, because the most pressing matter right now is to get that wall built. And towards that end, Roland asks Anna to help heat up a batch of cement every day from now on, to which she agrees, while Carter is put in charge of handling construction of the wall. Right now, things seem to be going exactly as Roland planned, but a few days later, he is sorely disappointed when he goes to check the progress of the wall because this shit is not what he expected. Progress is moving so slowly that it would be an insult to snails to call it a snail's pace, and on top of that, the wall is crooked as heck, so it'd never stand against an army of monsters. Carter apologizes for failing to meet Roland's expectations, and Barov explains that Carter has no real experience with building walls, and even with the cement that Roland made, unless they have a master mason there to supervise the operation, it will be very difficult to construct the wall properly. If that's the case, then Roland asks Barov to find a master mason as soon as possible, no matter how much it costs. But price isn't really the main issue here, because Barov says he can't think of a single person in Border Town who has that kind of talent. However, Roland tells him he should just find someone from a neighboring city if need be, because they need to get the wall operations up and running as soon as possible. Meanwhile, back in town, a man named Carl Van Bate is walking through the town, and when he looks at the gallows, he is reminded of how Anna was recently arrested for being a witch and supposedly executed. He used to spend his time teaching Anna and a bunch of the other kids, and after she was executed, he felt absolutely terrible about the whole thing because he failed to protect her. And shortly after that, another one of his students came to him for help because she had discovered that she was a witch as well. Just then, Bate was called over by a group of people in town because they had just spotted a royal decree from Roland posted in town, but none of them can read, so they don't know what it says. Bate goes over to them and takes a look at the decree, explaining that it says Roland needs several workers and masons for a project he is working on, of which all positions will be well compensated, but most of all, the decree stresses Roland's need to find a master mason to oversee all the operations. Seeing this, Bat realizes what he needs to do, so he runs straight to the administrative office to apply for the position of master mason. When Roland learns that someone has actually applied for the position, he is surprised since he thought it would take a whole lot longer, and as far as Barov can tell, Bate was just a regular teacher in town, but Roland still asks Barov to bring the man in so he can talk to him. When Bate walks in, Roland asks him if he really is a teacher, so Bate explains that he just taught the children a few things in his spare time. Roland then asks him why he thinks he is qualified for this position, and Bate explains that he has participated in several construction projects and renovations of public facilities over the years. Both Roland and Barov are surprised to hear that since the only people who had been involved in those kinds of projects in recent years were the people from the Masons Guild, so Roland asks Bate if he is also from the Masons Guild, and Carl confirms it. The Masons Guild members were all high-level elite artisans, but as Roland recalls, they were all executed some time ago after a construction project collapsed, so he asks how Bate managed to survive. Bate is aware of the story that has spread, but he tells Roland that that's not what really happened. Their supervisor at the time was trying to make some extra money by switching out the stones requested for the project for lower-grade ones that were cheaper. Bate and the other Masons tried to convince him that it was a bad idea, but the supervisor refused to listen to them, and when the project inevitably failed, the supervisor pinned all the blame on them to save himself, and as a result, they were sentenced to execution. The only reason Bate managed to survive is because he caught wind of what was about to happen and fled before he could be executed. Technically, that makes Bate a fugitive, but he says he has a reason for revealing himself like this and that he wants to atone for some sort of sin. Roland doesn't plan to pry for details, because as long as Bate can handle the work, that's all that matters to him. Thus, he appoints Bate as the master of the project and says he has high expectations of him. After that, Roland, Barov, and Master Carl take a look at the city map to decide on the details of the wall. Roland says he wants it to be roughly 600 meters long to cover the entire town and 15 meters high, while also being thick enough for 4 men to walk on top of it with ease. Master Carl explains that if Roland really wants the wall to be 15 meters tall, then the base of the wall needs to be twice as wide as the top, with a 1-meter trench for the foundation and he gives a rough estimate that if he gets 150 men, then he will be able to get the project done in 3 years. But Roland is disappointed to hear that because they only have 3 months before the demons attack. Master Carl is surprised to hear that Roland wants to build the wall to hold back the demonic beasts, but if that's really the case, then Carl tells him it's not completely impossible. If the goal is simply to stop the demonic beasts, then they don't need to build the wall so high. If they reduce the height to 12 meters, then the thickness of the base can be reduced by 1/3, and with a little increase to the manpower, it should be possible for him to get the foundation complete in only a month and a half, after which the wall can be constructed before the beasts attack. However, even with the time saved, building the entire wall would require a ton of cut stone, and they don't have any means to process all the stone they would need quickly enough to complete the project. Roland tells him that they actually won't need to cut or process any stones at all for this project, and to show him what he means, he takes Carl up back to the pile of stones that he bonded with cement. Carl is amazed by what he is looking at because he has never seen such a perfect bond before, and with this, he is certain that any size or shape of stone can be used to make the wall, so the project can be completed in 3 months after all. Roland is pleased to hear that, so he tells Carl that he's leaving the rest to him, but Carl actually has one other matter that he wished to discuss with Roland. However, before he could say anything, he pauses in his tracks because he has just come face to face with Anna, whom he had thought was dead. Anna is surprised to see Carl here as well, and she explains to Roland that Carl used to teach her, along with a bunch of other children from the village, and he always treated them extremely well. Carl is unbelievably happy to see that Anna is alive and well, so he thanks Roland for sparing her life even though she's a witch. Roland tells Carl that he doesn't see witches as inherently evil as others do, and Anna committed no crimes, so he would never harm her for no reason. Hearing him say this, Carl works up the courage to finally tell Roland about a situation that has been troubling him recently. Earlier, he said that he had a secret reason for wanting to apply for this position, and at the time, he didn't know how Roland would respond, so he didn't reveal it. But given Roland's stance on witches, he feels like it would be safe to tell him. He informs Roland that there is actually another witch in this village, and it is one of his students named Nana. Anna can hardly believe that Nana also became a witch, and if it were any other noble who had been informed of this, then they would have without a doubt started a witch hunt immediately. But Roland is different, so he tells Carl that he'd be happy to take Nana in and protect her. However, that isn't exactly going to be easy because Nana's full name is Nana Pine, and the Pine family is a family of minor nobles, so it won't be easy to convince them to let Roland take their daughter. And Roland can't just explain the whole situation to her parents either, because if they were to find out that she's a witch, there's no telling what would happen. They all agree that this is a rather big issue, so Roland comes up with a plan and asks Carl to bring Nana to the castle tomorrow under the guise of one of his usual lessons with her to avoid drawing suspicion. And once she arrives, Roland wants Barov to bring Nana to the kitchen, where he will be waiting to meet her. They both agree to Roland's plan, and the next day, Roland is waiting in the kitchen for Nana's arrival as planned, and a few minutes later, Carl arrives with her as planned. Nana looks really nervous, so Roland tries to ease the tension by introducing himself to her. And Carl encourages Nana to introduce herself to Roland as well, but she is still too nervous to look Roland in the eye. Roland asks her to have a seat, but Nana still doesn't want to budge, so he tries to entice her with a piece of cake he prepared in advance. The cake is really tempting to Nana, but she's still too scared to approach Roland. However, a moment later, Anna comes down the stairs, and Nana is elated to see her alive because she had missed Anna so much. Now that she realizes that Roland had saved Anna's life, Nana warms up to him quite a bit and is no longer nervous, so Roland asks her if it's true that she recently awakened her powers as a witch. Nana confirms this, so Roland asks her when it happened and if she can provide any details on how she discovered her powers in the first place. Nana explains that about a week ago, she found a small bird outside, and its leg had been hurt, so she really wanted to help it. Before she knew it, a water-like substance had sprouted from her hands, engulfing the bird completely, and by the time it was done, the bird's leg had been completely healed. Roland is amazed when he hears all this because that sounds like a healing ability, so he immediately asks Carter to go to the hunter's market and buy several injured and dead animals because he would like to test how far Nana's healing can go. A little while later, Carter returns with the animals Roland asked for, and Roland asks Nana to please try using her powers on the injured animals. At first, Nana is a bit hesitant, but she eventually does so, and from the tests, Roland learned a few things about Nana's abilities. She's able to heal injuries completely, and even severed limbs can be reattached if preserved well. However, her power doesn't allow her to regrow limbs, and it can't bring the dead back to life. Carter is beginning to understand why Roland is so interested in witches, because the ability to heal wounds like that has the potential to help so many people. Roland asks Carter to take Nana back home once she's done catching up with Anna, and at first, Carter finds this odd since he thought Roland would want to keep Nana here. However, the fact that she's the daughter of the Pine noble family means that if he simply kept her here by force, then while they might not be able to do anything about it, it would still breed resentment toward him. So it's better to simply have Nana come here as often as possible so she can practice using her powers in secret. Late in the night, the leader of a pirate organization is informed that her crew has made quite the haul tonight, and she is pleased to hear that. So she tells the messenger they get to keep whatever they found. The messenger is sure that the crew will appreciate the gesture, but there's actually something else he wanted to report. He informs her that the assassin she sent after Roland has just reported that the assassination failed. She poisoned Roland as instructed, but instead of dying, he just went unconscious for a few minutes and then woke up somehow. But the Pirate Queen says she doesn't want to hear the girl's excuses. She says she is going to give her one final chance to complete the mission, and to make sure the message is clear, she instructs her subordinate to send one of the assassin's sister's belongings to let her know what will happen if she doesn't succeed next time. Meanwhile, back in Border Town, progress on the wall has been going smoothly, and according to Carl's calculations, they should be right on schedule for the beast attack. They have also been able to stock up on quite a bit of food from Willowtown, so they won't have to worry about starving during the winter. However, Barov mentions that they have been running at a deficit to account for all the purchases, so as things are now, they will likely run out of money by next spring. Roland isn't too worried about that since he's just glad they have enough to survive the winter in the first place, and besides, they still have the ore trade under their belt, so once they get the chance, they can sell off the ores they would usually hand over to Longsong, and that should be enough to cover the deficit. Barov understands that, but he is still a bit worried because there's no way Duke Ryan is going to let it go if they suddenly cut off Longsong's ore supply. Just then, Roland is informed that an ambassador from Longsong has just arrived in town, so Roland asks for a feast to be prepared because he has to host his guest. A little while later, Roland meets with Mr. Hull, the ambassador of Longsong, and long story short, he is here to inform Roland that the deadline for the usual ore delivery to Longsong has passed and that he should send the ores immediately if he wishes to receive the food delivery. However, Roland says there was actually an unfortunate incident recently, so he won't be able to move forward with the deal as planned. Hull asks why, so Roland explains that the mine recently collapsed, so ore mining was forced to a halt, and as such, they have only produced 2 months' worth of ore, instead of the 3 months' worth that Longsong wants. Hull had heard about the mine collapse, and he understood why they weren't able to mine the promised 3 months' worth, but he asked why Roland hadn't simply delivered the 2 months' worth of ore they did have. However, Roland tells him there would be no point in doing so, because Longsong would only give them 2 months' worth of food, and that's not enough to keep his people from starving. Which is exactly why Roland sold the ore to Willowtown instead. Hull is surprised to hear him say that, because by his calculations, since Willowtown has never made such a bulk purchase of ore before now, the only way they would accept a deal like that is if Roland sold it to them at half the market price, which is exactly what happened. Roland says it was simply a better deal for them, and Hull understands that, but he asks Roland if he would be willing to reconsider if he offered to pay 70% market value for the ores in gold royals instead. Hull is a merchant with no real biases against Bordertown, so he doesn't have any qualms with cutting Roland a fair deal, and his deal certainly is tempting, but Roland is fairly sure that the nobles of Longsong won't be on the same page as him. However, he tells Hull that if he can get the nobles to agree to those terms, then he will be more than happy to sign a new deal. Hull says he will do his best, but he feels the need to warn Roland that with the winter months rolling around, he doesn't think the nobles will be open to accepting his people this year after this. But Roland says he is well aware of that, which is why he plans to build a wall and defend this town instead of evacuating. Hull is shocked by this revelation and asks Roland if he is sure about this because if his plan fails, it could spell disaster for everyone in Border Town. But Roland is absolutely certain that he can succeed, and since he has already decided, Hull has nothing more to say. So he acknowledges all that Roland has informed him of and heads back to Longsong to report back to the nobles. Later on, Hull is called into a meeting with the nobles back at Longsong, and that's where he informs them that Roland has already sold the ores they requested to Willowtown, and the nobles clearly are not pleased by this. He also mentions that Roland has already bought enough food from Willowtown to last the winter, and he doesn't plan on bringing his people to Longsong for protection during the winter months of the demons because instead, he intends to build a wall around the town to fight back against the demons. This makes all the nobles laugh because they think Roland is out of his mind if he thinks he can build a real wall in such a short time. Even so, Duke Ryan is disappointed that Hull's report is the first he is hearing of this, so he demands to know why Boris didn't inform him of it before this point, even though he spends most of his time in Border Town. Boris admits that he did in fact notice that Roland had been recruiting masons and master craftsmen, but he had simply assumed that Roland was just hiring workers to renovate his castle or something. He never could have imagined that Roland would attempt a project as ambitious as this. Ryan still isn't happy with Boris's incompetence when it comes to reporting matters, but he decides to table that discussion for now and instead asks Hull what his opinion on the matter is. Hull mentions that after hearing of the construction of the wall, he went to have a look at it before leaving Border Town, and he can confirm that there is indeed a wall being built. However, from what he could see, it didn't seem very big, so he has a hard time believing that it could stand up to a full wave of demonic beasts. However, he believes that Roland's goal in doing all this is actually to trade. He may be trying to get Longsong to agree to pay for the ores and gold royals by building a wall to gain some independence from them, but Hull doesn't necessarily think that's a bad thing. Roland has said he is willing to agree to a deal where they purchase the ore at 30% below market value, and Hull thinks that's an advantageous deal for them, regardless of what happens with Border Town's defenses, because if the wall fails, then things just go back to how they were before. And if the wall somehow manages to succeed in repelling the demonic beasts, then that will be to the benefit of Longsong as well, since that means the burden of fighting the beasts will be split, and they won't need to put as much effort or resources into fighting the beasts on this end. Additionally, Border Town being able to defend itself would make all the land between Longsong and Border Town available for cultivation. On top of all that, Roland is only here because of the royal decree, so in 5 years he will leave to return to the capital, at which point, a much more prosperous Border Town would then return to the control of Ryan. The other nobles all start mocking Hull for being so naive, but Ryan silences them because Hull's plan is actually very sound. He is basically saying that if Ryan goes along with Roland's demands, then there is no way he can lose because both outcomes will be advantageous for him in the end. And he is technically right about that, but Ryan says that is only the case because Hull is thinking of this strictly in terms of profits and losses. However, Ryan doesn't see it that way. He only got to where he is by being strict and ruthless, and he has no use for anyone who would dare to go against him, so he will never agree to Roland's terms. Meanwhile, back at Border Town, Roland calls for the attention of everyone in town to inform them of the current situation. Once everyone is gathered, he tells them that he recently had a meeting with the ambassador of Longsong who came to collect the usual ore payments. However, as most of them know, the mines recently collapsed, and they have yet to fully resume mining operations, so they didn't have nearly enough ore, meaning Longsong would only give them 2 months' worth of food, which won't be enough to get them through the winter. He reminds them of the tragedy that occurred a few years ago when the demonic beast attack lasted more than 3 months, and Longsong refused to give them any more food, so a lot of their friends and families ended up starving. Roland says he didn't want to let that happen, so he went ahead and bought food from Willow Town, enough to feed everyone in the town throughout the winter, but it came at a price. Doing so will likely make Longsong antagonize them, so they won't be allowed to seek shelter in their stronghold this year. However, Roland already has a plan for that as well, because once his wall is complete, they will be able to stand up for themselves and defend their territory. Roland's speech manages to rally all the people behind his plan, so now they are more than willing to help fight off the demons with him. He assures them that while demonic beasts may be scary, they are ultimately nothing more than wild beasts. He says he is willing to pay anyone who joins the militia 25 silver royals per month, and in the event that someone does meet their untimely demise during the battle, Roland is willing to compensate them with 5 gold royals, and learning of the generous compensation just makes the people even more eager to join. Later on, Roland is giving Anna and Nana a little physics lesson, and he tells them that the air is made up of multiple different invisible gases. This confuses them quite a bit since they've never heard of such a thing, and if the gases are invisible, then how exactly does he know there are multiple of them? Roland understands why they would find it hard to believe. So to demonstrate, he asks Anna to light a candle, and then he places a jar over it. Naturally, the candle goes out after some time, and they assume that's because it has used up all the air in the jar, but Roland tells them that there's still some air in there. He then asks Carter to help him pour some lime water around the jar, and after that has been done, when Roland lifts the jar, a gas clearly bubbles up through the water, turning it cloudy. This proves that even though the candle flame supposedly used up all the air in the jar, there was still something left in there to bubble out. Anna is finally starting to get it and asks if this means there is a gas that supports combustion, and another gas that can be used to put out flames. And Roland tells her she's exactly right. and he plans to help her use that knowledge to learn to use her powers to the fullest. But that's going to be a lesson for another day, so he tells them they can head home for now. They all say goodbye to Roland and prepare to leave, but before they do, Roland calls out to Carter and asks him if he managed to provide the ice and snow powder he asked for. Carter confirms this, but he honestly doesn't know why Roland asked for snow powder when they don't have anything that needs to be kept cold. But Roland just says he plans to use it for an experiment. Later that night, Roland finally returns to his room and is about to head to bed. But just then, he notices something off by the window, so he goes to investigate. And before he knows it, a woman appears behind him and presses a blade to his neck. Roland freezes up for a second, thinking an assassin has come to claim his life, but to his surprise, the woman releases him a moment later and tells Roland that she doesn't mean him any harm. Roland puts some distance between himself and her to be safe, and he is still a bit wary of her. But the fact that she didn't kill him just now is proof that she's not here for his life, so he decides to try talking things out first. He asks her who she is, and the woman tells Roland that her name is Nightingale. That doesn't really give him much information. But then Roland happens to notice the eye symbol on her cloak and recognizes it as the emblem of the Witch Cooperation Association, meaning Nightingale must be a witch. Nightingale is surprised that Roland is so knowledgeable about their association, but then again, that shouldn't come as much of a surprise given what she has seen of him these past few days. On that note, she says she wants to thank him for looking after Anna and Nana. Roland is surprised that Nightingale knows about Anna and Nana since he never informed the public, but Nightingale explains that a week ago, she came here because she heard that a witch had been captured. But after doing some investigating, she discovered that the witch hadn't been executed after all, and shortly thereafter, she learned about Nana's powers as well. Roland asks if this means she has been keeping tabs on him for an entire week without his knowledge, but Nightingale doesn't answer him right away and instead asks him to sit with her on his bed. Roland decides to go along with it, and Nightingale is honestly surprised he wasn't scared about sitting down with a witch. After all, most people would be terrified by the thought of simply coming into contact with a witch, but that's besides the point. Roland asks her to answer his question, so Nightingale confirms that she has indeed been spying on him for the past week, and she has seen practically everything he has done. However, if she was so good at keeping herself hidden while spying on him, Roland asks why she chose to reveal herself now, and that's when Nightingale reveals that a few minutes before Roland came in, his headmaid was here, and she put something in his drink. Roland is shocked to hear this because he can't believe Tyra would poison him, but Nightingale has no reason to lie about something like that, so it must be true. In any case, he thanks her for saving his life, but Nightingale says it's not a big deal, since she was just repaying him for what he did for Anna and Nana. However, she says she needs to take those two back with her to the Witch Cooperation Association. Roland asks why, because he already made sure that none of them would be harmed here, and he treats them as equals with proper employment contracts and high salaries. Nightingale acknowledges that Roland has indeed done a lot for those two, but there's something that even he can't help them with, and that's leading them to the Holy Mountain. It is the only place that witches can live without fear of persecution, and while Roland himself may not fear witches, if the general public were to find out about them, they certainly won't be as kind as Roland is. Roland asks if they are currently searching for the Holy Mountain in the impassable mountain ranges in the area, and Nightingale doesn't confirm it, but he can tell that that's exactly what's going on. And if that's the case, then he tells her that he can't let her take Anna and Nana because the month of the demons is fast approaching, and he can't let them face such dangers out in the mountains with no protection. Instead, he suggests that Nightingale could bring her fellow witches over to Border Town to spend the winter, and in the spring, they can resume their search for the Holy Mountain. Nightingale is utterly stunned by Roland's offer, and it's rather intriguing, but she says it's impossible because Anna is about to suffer a life-threatening ailment. She explains that on the anniversary of the day a witch gains their powers, they face an ordeal where every blood vessel aches with unbearable pain, with blood beginning to seep from their skin and their eyeballs bulging out of their sockets. If the witch can endure it, then they will recover in a week's time, but if not, then their organs will liquefy and they will die an agonizing death. The Witch Cooperation Association has means of increasing the survival rate of such ordeals, so Nightingale tells Roland that while she understands Anna's importance to him, she needs to take Anna away. And Roland can't really argue with that, so he agrees to let Nightingale take them for Anna's own good. He then offers to lead Nightingale to Anna, and Nightingale is very grateful for Roland being so understanding. She then disappears right before his eyes, which is a little surprising, but that must just be her witch power. Roland then walks down the hall to Anna's room, and when she opens the door for him, he tells her he has something important he would like to discuss. Both Roland and Nightingale explain everything to Anna, and she understands why Nightingale is asking her to leave, but she refuses and says she's not going anywhere. Nightingale mentioned that there's a chance of survival, so Anna says she is simply going to overcome the ordeal on her own, and nothing is going to change her mind. Nightingale doesn't want to force Anna to leave if she doesn't want to, so she agrees to let Anna stay. But Nightingale also plans to stay here as well, so she can give Anna the best shot at survival possible. So she says she's going to take Roland up on his offer to bring all the witches to Border Town. The next morning, Roland wakes up in bed as the maids all begin cleaning his room as usual. However, Tyre isn't here, and Roland wants to question her about why she tried to poison him. So he asks Carter to bring her here. However, Carter informs Roland that Tyre was actually found dead this morning. She had apparently jumped from the balcony, and that puts a major damper in Roland's plan to question her. A little while later, Nightingale appears in Roland's room, and he asks her if she was the one who killed Tyre. Nightingale admits that she wanted to help out a little by catching Roland's would-be assassin, but she says she wasn't the one who killed Tyre. She had a poison capsule hidden in her teeth, and the second she saw Nightingale appear, she swallowed the capsule and died from the poison. After that, Nightingale had to make it look like an accident so no one would get suspicious. Roland believes her, so he asks if she at least managed to find out why Tyre was trying to assassinate him, so Nightingale hands him a piece of paper with the details. Apparently, Tyre was being blackmailed into performing the assassination in order to save her sister, who was being held captive, and the only people Roland can think of who would have a reason to want him dead are the members of his family, so one of them must be after his head. Later on, Boris and Carter are called into a meeting with Roland to discuss the current state of the defense plan. Since the ore was sold at half price, they only managed to earn around 200 gold royals from it, and of those 200, over 110 were spent on materials. So they only have 90 left to work with. And the leftover money isn't going to go very far considering the fact that Roland has begun recruiting for the militia, so a lot of the money they will need is going to have to come out of Roland's personal savings. Furthermore, they have run into some severe problems related to the training of the militia, because men who have never held a sword before hardly stand a chance in a real battle, which is why Carter suggests they should go to Baron Boris and his knights to ask for help. Roland doesn't think that's such a good idea since there's no way Boris will help, but Carter seems convinced that Boris is a man of good character, and that he will no doubt rise to the occasion to help. Carter is simply too naive when it comes to matters like this, and Roland knows this situation is going to be a pointless endeavor, but he agrees to go ask Boris for help just to satisfy Carter's request. And Carter is really happy to hear that, so he gets up to go organize the meeting right away. While Carter is busy doing that, Roland heads over to Anna to help with her training because there's something he wants to try. He places two pieces of metal together, then he instructs Anna to try condensing her flames into a singular point. Anna puts some effort into it, and she eventually manages to condense her fire enough to get a high-powered blue flame. And with it, Roland guides her to successfully weld the two pieces of metal together. But while the experiment was a success, there was a distinct lack of eye protection, so they're going to be seeing spots for a while. Sometime later, Carter is leading Roland to Boris's mansion to have a meeting with him to ask for assistance from the knights, but things go about as well as Roland expected them to, because Boris backhandedly rejected Roland's request, saying he can't be part of such a foolish plan, and insulted him by offering a single gold royal, calling him both broke and stupid. Carter was enraged by Boris's blatant disrespect, but Roland told him to calm down because he doesn't want to create a scene here, and after that, they left. On the way back, Carter apologized to Roland for insisting on this meeting, since he never could have imagined that Boris would act in such a manner towards him. But Roland tells him he doesn't need to worry about it because he already expected as much. If they want to establish themselves, then they cannot rely on the other nobles for help, and besides, Roland already has a plan in mind for training the militia. This was the end of episode 5. Subscribe to not miss the next part.